Hello and welcome to the Cryptocurrency News Channel. Well, today we're going to talk about hyperinflation, the collapse of the dollar, etc., and why it's not actually going to happen because there's a lot more economic factors than just printing a lot of money, and that doesn't necessarily cause economic inflation because our inflation rate right now is very, very low. We're also going to discuss right now why the Chinese RMB or the digital RMB is not going to replace the USD as the world reserve. And that one is very, very easy. One of the primary reasons is you can't actually freely trade the yuan. And I'm going to guess you can't actually trade the digital yuan or the RMB across borders. There's a limit of like $50,000 each year per person that you can actually trade the Chinese money for other foreign money. And without a free exchange, can't really build up the correct markets for it to be the world reserve currency. So as long as China's system of government money stays closed and is not transparent, it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, for the Chinese RMB or the digital RMB to actually overtake the USD as the reserve currency. Now that we got that out of the way, hyperinflation generally has like three factors, I think. One is the printing of money, and we'll talk about that. The second one is actually production. And the third one is military and government. Now, printing money, yes, we have printed about 40% of all the physical money in existence this year. But that's an increase of roughly 50% in our money supply. Hyperinflation is actually defined by if a country goes through more than 50% inflation in a single month. Our inflation rate this year and last year has been at like 2%. So not anywhere even close. We're at like 2% a year, and you're required to get like 50% a month for hyperinflation. Now, here's the thing with this printing money. Yes, we've printed 40% of all the money in existence in the last year, and that's about $2 trillion. We've actually hit up the money machine and printed about $2 trillion. But the thing is, like for some of the hyperinflating economies like Zimbabwe, they printed like $50 trillion bills. They didn't like print like $50 trillion overall. They printed actually $50 trillion bills. So the amount of money that we're printing compared to the hyperinflationary economies of like Hungary after World War II, Germany after World War One, Zimbabwe about 10 years ago, and other such hyperinflationary countries is basically not even on the same scale. So no, we're not actually printing enough money to hyperinflate anything. So the printing isn't nearly enough. I mean, even if we print more, I think we could sustain it for quite a while. The second thing is means of production. If your production drops because, say, people are staying at home because of the pandemic, while you print just as much money, obviously things are going to inflate because you have more money and less production, right? Unfortunately, the U.S. economy isn't really dependent that much on labor, and this is where Andrew Yang actually has a point in his kind of campaign proposal because robotics and technology are replacing a lot of humans, and a lot of people can actually work from home, so the unemployment rate didn't skyrocket to 30-40% like it would have during the 1920s when we didn't actually have computers. I actually think like production is still pretty much the same as it always was, if not slightly growing, because the thing is, like with a lot of this physical production stuff, we can rely on machinery, we can rely on robotics, we can rely on a lot of technology now to keep up with the production. And fortunately for us, we're in a very advanced first world country in the United States. And because of that, the jobs that require physical labor are getting less and less. And the thing is, like, you can actually replace a lot of the physical labor, like, McDonald's with kiosks instead of people working at McDonald's for doing that. Like you can basically strip mine an entire mountain with a very small amount of people for coal, whereas it would take thousands of people maybe like 50, 100 years ago. So the thing is, just because people aren't working, not as many people are working, doesn't mean your production is any less. So while you're printing more money to make up for the people that would be making money if they were working, that money still has places to be spent because your production really hasn't dropped. So basically, all that money that you print just ends up going back into the economy, and there's just as much demand for the dollar bill, and prices don't really go up. Plus, people are saving for the rainy day, or like the rainy day right now. So people are still trying to accumulate your money, and as long as people aren't trying to spend all of it at once, basically on a less productive economy, you're really not going to get the inflation because even if you're passing money out, as long as there's plenty of stuff for people to buy with that money, you're generally okay. If there's less stuff to buy and everyone wants to buy it, with more money, then obviously you have a supply demand imbalance, and then things are going to inflate. So as long as we keep our production up, which we can with machinery, technology, and robotics, hyperinflation is probably going to be under control, or inflation is going to be under control. The third thing is really military and government. If you noticed all these governments that hyperinflated, whether it's Zimbabwe, Germany after World War One, Hungary after World War Two, like their governments didn't really have much credibility and they weren't very powerful. If you think about Germany, the Weimar Republic after World War One, they lost a war, they had to demilitarize, and they were stuck with a gigantic debt, and plus they didn't really have any kind of like power to pull the strings of the world and pull the levers of the world. Same thing with Hungary after World War II. They were like devastated, and they were a very, very poor country. Zimbabwe in the 21st century, you guys know all about that. Like their governments didn't really have much say in any kind of world affairs. They weren't the world reserve currency, and none of the other none of the economies around the world actually depended on them. The United States is in a very different position. We are the predominant superpower in the world. No one is even close. I know some of you are going to be like, but China. Yes, China might be the regional power in the Asia and Southeast Asia, but in terms of military might and even economic might, it's nowhere near the U.S. You can look at their total GDP, but look at their GDP per capita. That's how much each of their people are actually making. And it's way, way below. Like GDP-wise, they might be second in the world, but GDP per capita-wise, they're like basically like maybe even mid-bottom in terms of countries. And that means their people overall aren't actually that wealthy. You might see like Beijing or Shanghai and see a bunch of wealthy people, but overall their people actually aren't that wealthy. And the thing is, their military, think about it this way. We have 12 Enterprise-class nuclear carriers out patrolling the oceans. They have 2 carriers. Neither of them are nuclear. The first one can't even do any kind of battle. The second one's like kind of old technology as well, and they're all smaller than any of the 12 US nuclear carriers, and they don't have the capacity to really wage war against any of the nuclear carriers. What China can do is basically use those as a big like stick, waving it at Vietnam and other countries, and be the bully around the South China Sea. But in terms of power projection and military force, they were nowhere near the U.S. See, the thing is, if they could actually challenge the U.S. in military might, they would have taken Taiwan by now. The reason they don't take Taiwan is because they can't without like massive repercussions. See, the thing is, like Taiwan has missiles, and they can point them at Beijing or Shanghai. And the thing is, like, if you attack Taiwan, they're going to launch the missiles. So if China could actually take Taiwan before they could launch the missiles, like if they could take Taiwan within like 3 days, they would have done it by now. The thing is, like, the military can't. They're not that powerful, and they can't actually take it without the U.S. intervening first or Taiwan launching missiles at Chinese cities. So obviously, their military is nowhere near as powerful as the United States. So we're the predominant superpower in the world. We have the world's best military by far backing our money. And having the best military by far and the most economic power by far, and that actually gives us a lot of leverage with other countries, and that's why everyone wants the USD, because they trust in the U.S. government and they trust in the might of our military. The thing is, like, a foreign dictator might not like the United States, but they have to respect, the 20 battleships and the aircraft carriers sitting out there in their harbor, and that's something that Zimbabwe, Germany, Hungary, and all those other countries didn't actually have. They had no levers in world economic affairs, where the U.S. is all over the place. See, there's actually a reason why we're the world police. Being the world police gives us a lot of leverage and a lot of influence around the world, much more than if we weren't the world police. Like, China kind of wants to be the world police. They're just not powerful enough. And so if you've ever asked, like, why do we spend so much money being the world police? That's why. Without being the world police and without having our troops and army everywhere, we wouldn't have that much power within the world. And we wouldn't really have this U.S. homogeny. And I don't think we're really going to break out of that very soon, because no one else in the world wants that role. And the thing is, like, none of the westernized countries want China in that role. So if they have to choose between China and the U.S., they're going to pick the U.S. Or if they're going to have to pick between U.S. and another country, they're probably going to pick the U.S. as well in that role, because none of them want to spend the money themselves, and they sure as hell don't want Russia or China in that role. So because we have so much military might and so much political influence around the world, it's very, very unlikely to happen, because people will help us. People will basically help us, like, have our economy not crash, because if our economy crashes, it's really bad for everyone else. Like, yes, China's selling some of the bonds, but they're so heavily reliant on the U.S. For like a lot of exports and keeping their economy going. The thing is, if the U.S. collapses and no one buys the Chinese goods, China's going to have like massive, massive unemployment, and then there's going to be riots all over the place. And other countries are even more dependent on the USD. The reason people are buying Bitcoin and stuff right now is because they can't really, the people in those countries can't get their hands on the USD. There's a lot of demand for the USD, even more than we're actually printing. So our military involvement, our government influence goes far, far beyond our borders. Plus, our actual production and GDP, well, not maybe not GDP, but like our actual production of goods hasn't really drastically gone down. So even though people they're printing money, there's stuff to buy with that money. Plus, we're not printing nearly as much money as the countries that hyperinflated. So those three things put together, we're not going to see hyperinflation anytime soon. If it does happen, it'll be in the process of like many more decades down the line. And I think we're just going to do right now, like the Great Reset that they're talking about is probably just converting fiat money into digital money, which is a process we've been doing for the last 20 years. There's not going to be a drastic shift of wealth or whatever. You can see like Grayscale and all these funds already buying up crypto. Like I think when it's all said and done, they're going to be the ones that control most of the crypto as well. So yeah, this whole big seismic shift, massive transfer of wealth, I think it's being overblown. And the thing is like hyperinflation, collapse of the US dollar, nah, just not gonna happen, man. So that's what I have to say for now. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe and hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.